Thank you and welcome. So today I'm talking about some of the top nutrition myths. And I actually talked to several of my colleagues. I sent an email out on the listserv months ago and said, what are you hearing as nutrition myths, so that I'm making sure I'm covering the ones that all of us collectively hear. So number one, detox diets work. Gluten makes you fat and tired. This comes over and over again. Soy demasculinizes men. We don't need dairy for calcium. Artificial sweeteners are poison, and we can get all of our nutrients from food. The other huge, I wouldn't even call it a myth, is the whole topic of carbohydrates. So if you weren't in the last session, I encourage you to come to, I think it's at 3 o'clock, to listen to Alan Aragon and Jeff Volek debate about carbs. Because that's constant. Low carb, paleo, what do I do, etc. So first, a little bit about detox diets and cleanses, which are all grouped into one. And they're based on the theory, or the actual reality, that we are exposed to environmental toxins, pesticides, allergens, waste, and inflammatory substances through food on a daily basis. These build up in our diet, these build up in our bodies, make us sick, fat, and tired. And this is true. Depends on the person as far as allergies, and it also depends on the person as far as what we call food sensitivities. So some of these vary between people. But detox diets and cleanses, and there are a plethora of them. I'm going to cover a couple of them. But supposedly get rid of harmful substances. They cleanse your organs, help you lose weight, give you energy, decrease inflammation, and decrease disease risk. Does anyone have clients on these diets now? And are they experiencing success? Do they like them? Are they fatigued? Yes? Okay, so some success. Most of them, if you look at the body of, all of the detox diets out there, the majority, no alcohol, no caffeine, cut out all the highly processed foods. Basically, if it comes in a package, unless it's provided by them, like it's a juice or some substance provided by them, cut it out completely. No foods grown with herbicides or pesticides, so it's got to be organic. No simple sugars, and it's very regimented. So one of the best things about these diets is that they have different regimens as far as laxatives, diuretics, lemon juice, maple syrup, etc. It depends on the particular one. But one of the best things about these particular diets is that they cut out so many different foods that people go on them and go, oh my gosh, I lost 20 pounds, this thing's a miracle. Well, they're cutting out all the junk. They're cutting out the beer, the sodas, the cheese nips at night, etc. So it's not necessarily a miracle, but it can help them. And if that's what helps them for a short period and it's safe, I'm okay with it. Here are some of the most popular ones. The Master Cleanse is actually that's the lemon juice maple syrup one. Raw food diet, Blueprint Cleanse, and that's one where you're given a bunch of juices by mail. And then the colon cleanse. So the good, like I had mentioned, it cuts out a lot of low quality food. It's, people are going to feel better if they cut out all the garbage in their diet. And it makes it pretty easy. Instead of sitting there and giving somebody a specific diet and going, okay, let's work on portion sizes, let's work on this, let's work on that. This is, okay, clear cut, yes, no. You can have these things on this, you got to avoid all those things. So there's no thought process involved, which honestly makes it easier for people. Also cuts out excess calories, might eliminate some food sensitivities, and this is an interesting area. Does anyone have clients that have been actually tested for food sensitivities? There are a couple of different tests out there, and it's different than allergies, but basically after going through the test, it'll identify foods that you're highly reactive to, moderately, and low reactive to. Once you take those foods out, supposedly people feel better at energy. The best science is probably on food sensitivities and headaches or migraines, and then digestive distress. The raw food diet, another benefit of this is possibly fewer carcinogenic compounds consumed, and in some instances, fewer nutrients lost during processing. As we process foods, many nutrients are lost. If you took let's say you chop some vegetables high in vitamin C, leave them out for a little while, you're making dinner, et cetera, then you put them on your plate. By the time you actually consume them, they're not going to contain all the vitamin C that was in the original food. Likewise, cooking methods decrease many nutrients. Some increase them as far as certain antioxidants, but processing destroys a lot of nutrients and a lot of antioxidants. And I also mentioned fewer carcinogenic compounds consumed on the raw food diet. So grilling, baking, roasting, these all, anytime you put a particular food under high heat, it actually increases the production of cancer-causing compounds in it. In meat, when you expose it to high heat, so cooking fast and cooking very high temperatures, you'll get increased production of heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. But I don't tell people, hey, you've got to give up grilling forever. What you can do to decrease those, and it's mainly, again, it's meat and fish, etc., decrease the temperature. So low and slow. Cook your food low and slow. Cook over moist heat. That decreases the production of these compounds. Microwave meat first, then throw it on the grill. Get your, the charring that you like. And if you have hamburgers or turkey burgers, add herbs. Add things like rosemary, garlic, etc. Adding those will decrease the formation of these. Now, I've got a question for you all. What do these two have in common? That's potato chips, or it could be French fries and cigarettes. Can anyone guess? Take a stab. They have acrylamides, which are, these ones were produced during high heat cooking meat, organs, etc., fish. Acrylamides are actually produced in grains, grain foods, and plant foods. Also pie crust, and the darker the crust, the darker the, if you burn cookies, etc., the more acrylamides. But again, the common thing here is high temperature, frying, roasting, baking. It's sugars plus an amino acid that combine. And interestingly enough, there are many industries that purposely produce these compounds for grouts, water treatment products, plastics, and cosmetics. So they have a function, they actually have a purposeful use in our lives. They do cause cancer at very high doses in animals. And in people, the FDA will say, not a big deal. Don't have to get these out of your diet. They're not incredibly harmful. In people at very high doses, so those who are working in these factories, they've noticed nerve damage. So a little bit about the raw food diet. Those are the benefits for the raw food diet. But a little bit about the research, and there's not much on it. Here is a cross-sectional study of over 200 raw foodies, as I'll call them, that were on it for at least 2 years, and they consumed at least 70% raw food. And with this particular diet, you can consider yourself a raw foodie if you consume 70% or above, basically raw food, and then cook some of your foods. And they had 1,500, 1,800 grams of raw food daily, and they found that 38% were B12 deficient. That's really high. The normal prevalence of B12 deficiency in the population is about 1 to 15%. But lack of animal-based foods, you're going to have a lower increase, or unlikely that you'll consume B12. None of them had high triglycerides. That's a good thing. 46% had low serum HDL. So there's some good, there's some bad. Another study, and this one was in 216 men and 297 women, and they examined body weight and amenorrhea. And I wish they had looked at many other variables because they were on this diet for so long, almost 4 years. And they divided them into different groups, so the amount of raw food in their diet. And they found that the BMI was below normal in 14.7% of men and 25% of females. And 30% of women had either oligomenorrhea, so they were missing some menstrual cycles, or amenorrhea. Now the bad about detox diets and cleanses, there's no credible evidence of safety or efficacy. There's no indication that, hey, these are going to work for your clients, they're going to work for athletes. They can be very restrictive, making it tough to follow, especially for those people who travel all the time, or those people, even some of them are very high in fruits and vegetables, like really a lot of fiber in them. So, you got to take that into consideration. Low calories, low energy, fatigue, headaches, and dizziness. For the people who have had clients, did your clients experience any of these? Could they work out? Could they work out on this diet? No, not really. Low in protein, and So that's obviously a concern. And the lower calories in your diet, the higher amount of protein we actually need to maintain our muscle mass. So really bad combination. Let's say you've got somebody on one of these detox cleanses for 10 days, 500-600 calories, minimal protein in it. I'm talking like 20-30 grams maybe on some of them. And then they go to exercise. They're not going to have any energy. And the ability to increase muscle growth and repair muscle tissue is going to be pretty negligible. Decrease in athletic training and performance, and it might perpetuate disordered eating. And some people, they'll gravitate toward these things, and they'll gravitate toward diets in general because it's a way to continually restrict food intake. It's a okay way to do it. The other thing about these diets is they're low in nutrients in general. I mean, anytime you cut your calorie intake, you're going to wipe out a lot of different nutrients. And very low, and they can be low in phytochemicals. The juice cleanse, probably pretty high because it's all fruit and vegetable juices. Very low in vitamin D, they all cut out dairy. Low in calcium, low in zinc. Iron and B12, which are two things. If iron's the most common nutrient deficiency, especially in women, and B12 is actually considered fairly common. Vitamin E, other B vitamins, omega-3s. So basically you cut out a lot of nutrients you need for good health. And the useless. This is one thing that when they always say, okay, detox diets, they help you cleanse. Well, that's what your organs do. Our nose hairs, our mucous linings, they filter out dust, bacteria, allergens. Skin is very protective against harmful substances. Our kidneys filter waste, about 2 quarts a day that passes through urine. For everybody going to the reception later, your liver will metabolize all the alcohol you drink there, okay? You don't need the Blue Point cleanse or any of those cleanses to do that, unless maybe you drink too much, I don't know. But that's the job of your liver. So our organs do all those things. So that point of the cleanse, I don't really understand. But done right, again, I don't argue with somebody that really is adamant about something. I say short term. Sure, you want to do it a couple days, don't work out during that period. Do it during a time when you're taking a couple of days off from your training. Help your clients choose the one that does the least harm. So consider looking at their diet and then going through the cleanse with them and going, okay, maybe not this one, but why don't you try this one for a few days if you're stuck on doing a cleanse? Again, consider workouts. And I would never recommend cleansing if somebody has an injury or illness due to the increased metabolic demands to recovery from the injury or illness. Now, what about gluten? Who here has clients on gluten-free, low-carb, et cetera type diets? Very common. So I hear this all the time. We can't digest gluten. Most people are gluten sensitive. Eating gluten-free equals weight loss. This is the most common one. Grains are poison. Gluten-free means better athletic performance. And in fact, last year around the Olympic time, a couple of athletes came forward and said, you know what, hey, I'm gluten-free and my athletic performance is so much better because I took these foods out of my diet. So there's some anecdotal evidence. But what is gluten? It's the major storage component in wheat. It's made from glutenin and gliadin. And glutenin are the blue foam roller looking things, and gliadin are the red balls. But it's not just in wheat, it's in all of these different, encorn is a ancient wheat, farro, spelt, semolina, so it's in tons of foods, rye and barley. And this is from one of the foremost professors on celiac disease at University of Maryland, Alessio Fasano. And this is actually the little red balls. So that's the gliadin. And he identified parts that he believes have cell destruction activity, immune destruction, the green, and then gut permeating activity in the blue. I'll talk about that in a minute. But where is gluten? And many times I have people tell me, hey, I'm gluten-free, and then they're drinking a beer while they're telling me, and I'm like, you're not gluten-free. Or hey, this gluten-free diet's doing me so much good. And then, they'll put some salad, they'll go to McDonald's, put salad dressings on their salad. Most sauces, dressings contain gluten. Tons of different supplements contain gluten. And sometimes it says it, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's harder to find. licorice, tons of candies. Unfiltered vinegar contains gluten, and of course, beer. Wine does not. And it even appears in lunch meats, it appears in malted beverages, and due to contamination, French fries, as well as tortilla chips. I thought, oh, tortilla chips, they're corn, right? So one day I went home, I was looking up something on Moe's, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they make their tortilla chips with wheat. Wheat-corn combo. But where is it? And this is from a colleague of mine who actually has celiac disease. And these are the things, like if you have any clients that want to go gluten-free, these are some of the words, just a few of the things that they actually have to look for and avoid. So it's everywhere. It's all over. And if you are at a place, let's say you're at a restaurant or you're at a friend's house, I'll give you a story. My mom was cooking something gluten-free for a neighbor. And I said, you have to wipe the surface of the counter because you just baked something else. And you have to bake it in separate pan, make sure that doesn't have wheat on it. And she's like, that's nonsense. But the flour actually can stay in the air for about 24 hours. So many restaurants even, they'll say, oh, we've got gluten-free this, or this was made on a gluten-free line, but they've got to completely clean and wash down the equipment for it to be gluten-free. And preferentially have some sort of barrier, like a wall or those big straps between gluten-free and gluten-containing items. So what is celiac disease? It's an autoimmune disease that actually occurs over a period of time. It doesn't just happen like that. And according to Dr. Spano and others, it's a combination of the genetic susceptibility plus the consumption of gluten that causes the celiac disease. And in those who have celiac disease, what's interesting is all of these grains don't contain gluten, corn, rice, buckwheat, etc., but they can cause increased sensitivity for certain people. So in celiac disease, it damages the villi of the small intestine and actually can cause death of some of the villi, very patchy deaths, which is interesting because when they go in to do intestinal biopsies, they've got to take it in several areas because if they took one, you could have damage in another. And so when they're looking at it, they may not actually recognize that you have celiac disease. But the death of that villi, that's where you absorb many nutrients. So one of the commonalities, people will come in and they'll have unresolved anemia, can't resolve it with iron, like what's going on. They may have osteoporosis. They may be low in other chronically deficient in vitamin D, and it's not resolving. And that could be due to celiac disease because their body just can't absorb it even with high supplemental doses. There's an increased prevalence over the past several years, and it's not just because of detection methods. What's interesting is there are over 300 symptoms. Most commonly, we've always heard, hey, it causes GI distress. But according to all the researchers, that's actually not the most common symptom. It's anemia. That's the most common symptom. Other autoimmune diseases are very common in people with celiac disease, especially Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And there's one more, type 1 diabetes. So when I get somebody that, all of a sudden developed Hashimoto's and they've got these other things going on, I'm like, you may want to get checked for celiac. Here's the iceberg model of prevalence. And basically, it's showing that most of the people with this disease are actually undiagnosed. There's just a small percent that are diagnosed. And then at the bottom, there are tons of them that have latent celiac disease. And those are the ones that test positive for the genetics of having celiac disease, but they may be asymptomatic. Again, most people with celiac disease are undiagnosed. You want to diagnose before treating. A person that goes on a gluten-free diet, even if it's for a few weeks, you have to eat gluten every single day for about a month for those antibodies to show up against gluten. So people that stop eating gluten and then go get tested, tests won't be valid, not the blood tests anyway. They recommend these blood tests as well as, again, those intestinal biopsies, at least 4 to 6, to look at the patchy areas that could be destroyed. And the only solution, unfortunately, is lifelong avoidance of gluten. They can have about 10 milligrams a day or less. Now, what about gluten sensitivity? No standardized test for this. They're working on one. It's based on symptoms. So there are people out there that, they're going to have problems with wheat. They're going to notice bloating, headaches, fatigue, whatever. And the only thing they can really do is go off it and stay off it. Possibly reintroduce it and see if those symptoms come back. I always tell people, if you feel bad, stop eating it. It's pretty easy. So why the rise in prevalence? This is what I find most fascinating. In 1961, there was an increase in wheat produced with fertilizers, which made more yield. You know how farming is the past several decades. How can we make more of a product for as cheap as possible so we can feed the masses for less money? So they used a lot of fertilizers, produced a wheat that was very rugged, survived drought and disease. This is a different variety of wheat than what was consumed 10,000 years ago or 9,000 years ago. And then they also, during processing, they disassemble the wheat and then put it back together if they want a whole grain. So there are a couple things, but this wheat is not what, our great-grandparents ate. And according to Dr. Spano, again, wheat, rye, barley, that really came into our diet about 10,000 years ago. He says that part of the gluten chain cannot be digested, that gluten is toxic. That's the one I showed that looks like the string of pearls. And it can cause leaky gut. And leaky gut is basically, it's something that contributes to autoimmune diseases according to what they think. This is emerging research. But there's the indigestible gluten fragment, which typically in between cells you have these tight junctions, which are like glue, and they keep those endothelial cells together. When there's a break, that means fragments can get through and get into the bloodstream, and that's leaky gut. So his conclusion is gluten is a chronic modern-day poison. We don't need it. Grains aren't good for us. Go on the paleo. It's intrinsically gluten-free. I didn't attend Alan's talk. I'll have to listen to it later. But I'm just reporting what he says. Yet there's no such thing as gluten-free because it's everywhere. So zero does not actually exist in nature. There's no stats on gluten intolerance, again, or not gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity. There's no statistics on wheat allergies. We don't know how many people have wheat allergies. They don't even know why wheat allergies develop in adults or in children. No clue. Potential link between undiagnosed celiac disease and autoimmune diseases. And that's all Dr. Fasano. Again, he's University of Maryland. Another professor, and this is a great website, University of Chicago Medical Center, Dr. Guandolini says, you know what, if you have celiac, stop eating it. If you think you have sensitivity, stop eating it. But otherwise, the rest of us can enjoy grains. So there's the difference. I'll let you all decide. If your clients come to you, always recommend they go get tested by a very good endocrinologist, because restricted diets are difficult to maintain, and gluten-free foods are more expensive. That is, if you do the packaged foods. Of course, if you do meats, eggs, dairy, etc., not much more of a cost. But many of the packaged foods are actually pretty nutritionally empty because they add all these low-fiber flours that don't have a lot of nutrients in them to make the gluten-free products, because if some of the other flours that have more nutrition in them, are texture and taste is not very good. So next, soy. I hear this all the time. I had an NFL player who's trying to convince me the other day about soy and his masculinity. But the culprit with soy is the isoflavones, and these are in many foods. They're phytoestrogens. Soy is the most has the most isoflavones of any plant food out there. They have hormonal and non-hormonal properties, and some researchers are concerned about chronic long-term exposure. Do we know, like, when soy really was something hot in the American diet, do we know if people eat a ton of soy, what's going to happen years down the road? Soy has many purported health benefits. Some studies show adverse effects, especially rodent and in vitro studies. Studies on soy and reduced breast cancer, this is interesting because it's gone back and forth. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah, it's good. No, it's neutral. It doesn't matter. And basically, they've come to the conclusion that soy is protective if kids around 4 to 6, girls around 4 to 6 consume soy frequently in their diet. Maybe it's actually can decrease cancer risk possibly up to 50%. And it's now okay for breast cancer survivors to consume some soy. But very high exposures in animals actually cause infertility. So scientists began to wonder, wait a minute, okay, if it causes this in animals, what does it do to humans? But the thing about it is animals actually metabolize isoflavones very differently than humans. So this is where taking animal research and applying it to humans, we have to be very cautious. This effect has not been seen in humans. Yet, if you read the press, in the past couple of years, oh my gosh, it's bad, it decreases sperm count in men, it does all these things. And again, it's not very masculine. But there's one small pilot study that found that soy consumption was associated with a lower sperm concentration. Clinical trials have found no problem with sperm quality or concentration. And this is the study that the newspapers jumped on. And they took 99 men in a fertility clinic, looked at their diet. So they gave them food frequency questionnaires. How often do you eat oranges? How often do you eat this? How often do you eat that? And they asked them about how much soy they ate over a 3-month period, so just 3 months. The majority of men who ate soy had lower sperm concentrations, within normal limits, the majority of them. A few on the higher intake of the soy range had low sperm concentration. Yet they didn't look for confounding variables, primarily obesity. So was that low sperm concentration due to high soy, or was it due to the fact that these men were actually obese? And soy foods and isoflavones showed no relationship to total sperm count, sperm mobility, or other measures of fertility. So a meta-analysis, scientists got together and they said, you know what, because of this conflicting research, we're going to look at everything. And they got 15 placebo-controlled trials, sound, scientifically conducted trials, and included studies in adult men who consumed soy foods, isolated soy protein, or isoflavones, and found they had no effect on any of these variables. So again, that was one pilot study that didn't control for confounding variables, but according to look at all the research, there's really no effect. The chemical structures are similar to estrogen, like I said, but it's not estrogen. It doesn't contain estrogen, as people always tell me. Soy does have some benefits. It can lower LDL by a small but significant effect. Each 1% drop in LDL lowers heart disease by 1 to 2%. And if it replaces high saturated fat foods, soy has an even greater effect on heart disease risk. It does increase muscle protein synthesis, not as well as whey, though. It may prolong the anabolic window. That's research that came out last year, but they need to tease out some of the data and look and see whether it's soy or casein that had this effect, because they combined them. The next is dairy. How many people have anti-dairy clients? Just 1? 2? Okay. And here's what I hear: we're the only mammals that drink another animal's milk. Hormones in milk can cause kids to mature and go through puberty early. Humans haven't evolved enough to digest dairy. Most people are lactose intolerant, and we don't need it for calcium. So the research, all milk, including breast milk, contains hormones. Some cows are given that bovine growth hormone. I always tell people, if you don't want that, go get organic milk. It's free. Just, free from bovine growth hormone. But pasteurization actually destroys most of that. And the remaining amount is broken down into trace inactive fragments in the GI tract. Plus, it's species specific, biologically inactive in humans. So, it really actually is pretty equivalent, whether it contains it or whether it doesn't, because it's inactive in humans. What about lactose intolerance? There's a high prevalence of lactose intolerance. Basically, people who have this can't digest the sugar lactose and break it down, so they have, most commonly GI distress, bloating, et cetera, sometimes diarrhea. Happens gradually after the age of 2. And it can also happen, secondary lactose intolerance can happen because of an injury or an illness. So Crohn's disease and celiac disease, they destroy parts of the small intestine that may cause lactose intolerance. It's more common in several groups. They don't know why. 2 ways to detect it: hydrogen breath test and a stool test, which is given to kids. But for people who are lactose intolerant, they can usually stand cheese. In fact, some aged cheeses have no lactose whatsoever. Many can withstand yogurt, especially good yogurt, the kind that actually still has the probiotics in it, because they will break down the lactose. And most can actually stand some milk. They've just got to drink it in small quantities and drink it over a period of time. But one thing that milk contains, besides 9 nutrients, it's the primary source of calcium and vitamin D in the diet in people over 2. Plus, it contains other bone-building nutrients. Vitamin D in particular is extremely hard to get in other foods. You can eat leafy greens. You got to eat a lot of them. It's not, first of all, they're not as bioavailable as the calcium from dairy. And like I said, you got to eat a lot. For people who want to go with some of the milk alternatives, the type of vitamin D is not as good for your body. It doesn't increase vitamin D stores as well. So that's one consideration. Plus, the calcium actually settles to the bottom of the container, so they have to shake it to actually be able to drink it. The other thing I'll hear about dairy is that, hey, the protein in dairy, it's really bad for bone tissue. And protein actually makes up a good part of bone, both the volume and the mass. So looking at high protein diets and calcium loss, there's no increase in urinary calcium excretion from higher protein diets through food, even up to 2.1 grams per kg body weight. So from the research, you can go on a higher protein diet. You're not going to have an increase in calcium excretion. And people also tell me that countries that don't eat a lot of dairy have higher bone mineral density. And that's possible. There are several other factors, including activity. Like if you look at some of the people in Africa, they're walking with, I talked to a couple of African women that every day they walk miles and miles with this huge basket full of heavy weight on their head. Okay, they don't consume dairy, but every weight they're getting bone-building activity by walking and carrying a ton of weight. And you can tell by their musculature, women who don't actually exercise like on purpose, but just because of their farming practices, they're building bone tissue. What about acid and alkaline diets? There is a linear association between calcium excretion and acid load in the diet, but this doesn't mean the calcium was actually leached out of the bone. It could be dietary intake and blood levels of calcium. And there's no indication that promotion of the alkaline diet will actually prevent osteoporosis. So this is stuff that they still need, in my opinion, they still need to tease out. Research still needs to look at this. And also those plant-based foods contain compounds that decreased calcium absorption. They contain phytic acid and oxalic acid. So next two, I've got artificial sweeteners. And this is a very emotional topic. But some of the side effects people report: headaches, decreased testosterone, increased cancer risk, weight gain. And actually, there are a subset of people who cannot break down aspartame very well in the body, or they actually break it down. We don't break it down. And so they will get headaches. That is indeed true. They're considered GRAS, generally recognized as safe. A couple of the, saccharin is an older one, but that came under fire years ago, and some of it still lingers because of rat-based research saying, hey, high saccharin equals cancer, bladder cancer in rats. The problem with that was that the mechanism by which it caused bladder cancer is completely irrelevant for humans. So it's not been shown to cause cancer in humans, and it's not really metabolized by the body. The thing about it is you don't see saccharin nearly as much now, probably because of this study. Aspartame, this is one that for most people, it just passes right through. Again, there's a subset of the population that breaks it down and they experience headaches. Interestingly, it can cause a very slight increase in blood glucose. What about diet soda and obesity? These are all observational studies, and this is, is there a link? Isn't there a link? It'd be nice if there were more research out there to really look at this. But a lot of this press is coming from a couple different studies. One, the San Antonio Heart Study, where they took they looked at data from 5,000 people over a 7 to 8 year period. And they found that all soda drinkers gain weight. Aspartame, non-nutritive sweeteners, sugar sweetened, doesn't matter, they gain weight. Diet soda drinkers gained a lot more weight. But again, this is observational in nature. Is there another factor that causes people to gain weight? Do certain people just choose diet drinks? We don't know. Framingham Heart Study. This one was 9,000 people in a 4-year period. And those who drank both sugar-sweetened and non-sweetened were more likely to gain weight. So again, there's something about they're noticing, observationally at least. Soda drinking, weight gain. The researchers are questioning, is this the Big Mac hypothesis though? Is it, okay, you know what, I'm gonna eat all this stuff and then I'm gonna go ahead and drink my Diet Coke and I'm cool. I can drink my Diet Coke with my, what was it, vodka at night. I can drink 5, 6 of them, I got Diet Coke, no calories, I'm fine. Not gonna gain weight. They don't know what there's no real conclusive evidence here. Is natural better? We don't know. There are several types of natural. There's stevia, sugar alcohols. Sugar alcohols cause digestive distress in some people. It's in a lot of sugar-free diabetic foods. Lohan Go, that's a new one. And then there are certain fibers that actually increase sweetness. So sugar is actually a lot easier to replace in food, and food formulators are working on all these combinations for natural, because there's an increased desire for natural foods. And last but not least, I hear this all the time, and I know many of my colleagues are very anti-supplement. So they'll say, you know what, you can get all your nutrients from food, just eat a good healthy diet, doesn't matter, you'll get every single thing you need. And really you can. If you sit there and add some oysters to your diet, you'll get some copper. If you add some salmon, you're gonna get some omega-3s a couple times a week. Eat tons of fruits, eat tons of vegetables, eat some whole grains. If you plan a really well-rounded diet, you could probably hit all those nutrients. But the problem is most of America does not do that. Here's a little older data from N. Haynes, and this is the percent of people above adequate intake for vitamin D. Vitamin D is found in milk, it's found in some yogurts, some mushrooms. I've never seen them in the store. They expose mushrooms to UV light. And it's found in bones. So if you eat, like if you get canned fish and actually chew the bones, which my parents do, I don't know why, but they chew the bones, you can get some vitamin D, but not in a whole lot of foods. And according to this data, most people don't get enough in their diet. And we know that the prevalence of vitamin D insufficiency and deficiency, extremely high. And the population I work with pretty much all men right now, and a lot with darker skin, all male athletes. And most of the time I'll get them tested and they're all deficient. Calcium, this is the percent above adequate intake. And these are age groups that got cut off. But basically showing the yellow is teenagers and the red is early adults. Basically showing that very few people, the youngest group of all, those are infants, get almost the adequate intake. The rest of them are extremely low. Same thing with magnesium. This is a nutrient that I think, and again, the age groups got cut off. But this is the one that I think is going to be the new vitamin D because it's in a ton of foods, very small quantities, and yet has so many different important roles in the body. It's important for over 300 biochemical reactions. It's important for bone tissue, et cetera. But many people are not meeting their magnesium needs. And when I look through diets, I'll look for certain foods that, I'll go through and I'll go, okay, if they're missing, I've got some of the high sources memorized. If they're missing these foods, they're likely low in all of these nutrients. So to sum things up, I know we got a couple minutes for questions. Here are my rules. Never place, and I know this is tough, but never place dietary restrictions, allergies, nutrient deficiencies, et cetera, on your clients. I'll see some dietitians, and it's easy to do because we get so caught up in a certain area. We get so caught up in, let's say a person has celiac disease, or a dietitian, one of my colleagues might have a food allergy, that we think, hey, everybody might have this. Let me hone in on this area. Speak openly from what the science says, and I love what Dr. Volek said earlier, that the science is so vast that it's sometimes tough, and we can't make these conclusions. I can't make a total conclusion on artificial sweeteners, but I'll listen to the client, then make a recommendation based on what I'm hearing from them. Don't boil down clients' issues into one food, one ingredient, one meal. And I know people tend to do this because it's like, you know what? If I cut gluten out, it's going to do everything. I'm going to lose weight, have that body I want, I'm going to feel better, etc. But usually it's a multitude of factors that, as you all know, over time need to be, it's just like training. Over time, you got to fix all these different things, and then they'll feel better. And I always say, remember that clients give you half the story, because I don't know about the people you work with, but I'll be working with someone, and then later on, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, my doctor prescribed a pill once a month. What was that? It's vitamin D. Oh, it was? Well, how much am I supposed to take? I have no idea. Do you have your blood work? Nope. So they forget all these things, and I have to constantly ask questions, at least my clients. And then I said this recently to a gentleman, favor progress, not perfection. I was trying to talk him down on actually alcohol consumption. And, you know, I've come to realize that there are so many of these diets that are, it's almost like, what was the one years ago? Body for life. Okay, eat these foods only, stick on this only. Most people aren't going to do that restrictive diet, at least my clients aren't. So, you know, those do work if you can follow them, but I try to, you know, say, hey, let's get some progress. You don't have to be absolutely perfect, because there's no such thing as a perfect diet. None of these diets are perfect. You can pick and choose pieces of them that you like, and then help your clients to create what works for them based on medical history. Do they cook? Do they not cook? What's their training level? And what are their goals, etc. So that's it. Does anyone have, and I think we have 5-10 minutes for questions before, I guess,